You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
Welcome back to the Asians in Hockey podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Nate Nikau. Happy Pride Month, everyone. I have to be honest, as a cis-bi person in a straight relationship, I do find myself a bit detached from Pride Month more and more, especially as it loses its sense of subversiveness, and even more so as we're seeing the LGBTQ+ community turn on its own in many cases. Trans people are a crucial part of the community, and any movement that tries to take trans people out of the conversation is not, or should not be, a part of Pride. So this year, for Pride Month, I'd like to challenge you, if you're listening to this and you're cisgender, make this month about recognizing trans people and fighting on their behalf. It isn't just conservatives that are targeting trans people these days. Almost everyone seems to be throwing them under the bus in order to further their own agendas. Okay, so I realize it's been a long time since I last published an episode, and I do want to apologize for that. After getting back from Switzerland last month, I found myself right in the middle of trying to get my final paper done for one of my classes, and immediately after that, work got really busy. And for those of you who don't know, my day job is for a law school, and the last couple of weeks of May are always really busy as I dive into commencement season. Now, I know this is a hockey podcast, but I do want to share a little bit about the other side of my sports fandom, which is European football, or soccer as we call it here on this side of the Atlantic. I have been a fan of Arsenal Football Club since about 2014, and our men's team just won the English Premier League title for the first time since 2004. The team was also playing in the European Champions League final, which they lost in an absolute heartbreaker that wasn't even decided in extra time, but had to go all the way to the penalty shootout. In any case, I've been a little bit distracted from hockey lately, but I'm going to do my best to get back into the swing of things. Okay, before we dive too deep into things today, let's get my intro out of the way. As always, I have a few favors to ask of you. First off, if it's safe for you to do so, could you take out your phone right now and send this podcast to one or two of your friends? One of the best ways we get the word out about the show and build this community is through word of mouth, so we would love it if you could help us out by spreading the word. Second, it would be fantastic if you could post a quick 5-star review of the show on Apple Podcasts. This is honestly the best way to help build our audience on all of the podcast platforms. And to those of you who've already left a review, thank you so much for your kind words. Third, if you've been listening for a while and you would like to help out with some of the production and hosting costs, you can do that through buymeacoffee.com. Just head over to buymeacoffee.com/AsiansInHockey to make a donation. And as a gift, I will send you one of these cool Asians in Hockey podcast stickers if you donate at least $5 US. Just be sure to send me a message through Instagram or on AsiansInHockey.com so I can be sure to get you your sticker. And finally, we would love to hear directly from you with your thoughts, your stories, and your feedback. You can get in touch with us by visiting AsiansInHockey.com/contact and sending us a voice note or an email. We might even read your message or play your voice note on an upcoming episode, with your permission, of course. Now, on today's episode, I've invited my friend Pam Yau to switch seats with me and actually interview me about my own life as a hockey fan. Last time I sat in the guest seat, my friend Ava Wood interviewed me about my life as a hockey player, coach, and content creator, but today you're going to hear about my love for hockey as a fan. Now, before we get into all of that, I do have a quick announcement to share with you. Asians in Hockey is now a community partner with a group called Moonshot, an organization that is working to elevate API professionals and athletes across the global sports and wellness industry. If you're interested in checking them out, I'll place a link in today's show notes, but you can also visit them at meetmoonshot.org. Okay, let's take a quick break, and when we return, I do want to talk a bit about the state of hockey itself, as well as cover some Asian hockey headlines. We'll be right back.
Great news! The Korean Drama Podcast is back for our 6th season.
The Korean Drama Podcast is the podcast about watching Korean dramas by people who don't watch Korean dramas. Hosted by Candace, Jane, and me, Kim.
Wait, if it's our 6th season, can we still say we're people who don't watch Korean dramas?
I'm sure it's fine. Let's just call it character development, which we love in K-dramas.
For our new season, we're recapping the hit 2025 romantic fantasy series Heavenly Ever After, about an elderly couple who reunite in the afterlife. Only he's now in his 30s while she's chosen to appear in her 80s.
Awkward.
So join us each week as we discuss the highs and lows of the afterlife in Heavenly Ever After, episode by episode.
Part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
Welcome back. Now, before we get too serious, I want to take a quick moment to shout out a few people in our community who have had some incredible things happen recently. First, to our unofficial podcast captain, Nick Suzuki. What a season and what a run. Coming off a 101-point regular season, the first Canadian players to hit that mark since Mats Naslund in 1986, Suzuki led Montreal all the way through 2 7-game series against Tampa Bay and Buffalo before the Habs finally ran out of gas against Carolina in the Eastern Conference Final. He led the team in scoring throughout the playoffs. So Nick, if you're listening, and I know you're not, we're so proud of you. Go Habs, go. Hopefully next year we can make it even one step farther. To Nicole Gosling of the Montreal Victoire, who is now a Walter Cup champion in her rookie season. In the regular season, she put up 19 points in 30 games with a +16 rating, playing first pair minutes as a rookie. Was named a PWHL Rookie of the Year finalist and then carried that dominance right into the playoffs. She scored one of the most memorable goals of the entire postseason, tying the game with 2 seconds left in Game 1 of the finals against Ottawa, and led all playoff skaters in blocked shots. She was all over the ice, and whenever I watched a game, not a moment went by during one of her shifts that I didn't think, there goes Nicole, look at her go. The Victoire won the Walter Cup in 4 games of a best-of-5 series, so congratulations, Nicole. And finally, this one literally just happened yesterday, so I had to include it. Congratulations to Manny Malhotra, who was officially named the 23rd head coach of the Vancouver Canucks on Monday. Malhotra, whose father immigrated to Canada from Punjab, India, is the first person of South Asian descent to hold a head coaching position in NHL history. He came up through the Canucks system, led the AHL's Abbotsford Canucks to a Calder Cup championship in 2025, and now gets to take the reins of the NHL club. If you'd like to hear more about Manny's story, I'll link to an episode of a podcast called The Minority League, where he shares his journey through the sport. Okay, so I had said on social media that I was going to try to talk about some of the larger issues in hockey culture, so here goes. I do have to place a trigger warning here as I'll be discussing rape and sexual abuse. I won't be covering any details, but the nature of this story does necessitate a warning. So, hockey is in a weird place right now. I've talked about some of the issues specifically plaguing the U.S. men's national team in previous episodes of the podcast, but there are a whole lot of other issues that have been plaguing the sport for a very long time, some of which are the very reason this podcast exists. But I want to have a brief discussion specifically about sexual abuse in hockey, particularly in the way hockey institutions and even the culture of the sport itself not only enable abusers, but empower and uplift them. Now, don't get me wrong, these kinds of problems exist in other sports as well, but we're currently at an inflection point in the sport of hockey. So, if you're not familiar with the story, let me catch you up on what's going on. Now, a lot of how I've framed this is based on a case study I wrote for a class on communication in society. And if you're interested in reading my full case study, I have linked to it in today's show notes. I'm also saying this to point out the fact that I've done plenty of research into this. Now, before you draw any conclusions yourself, I do encourage you to read up on this fully, but I want to get ahead of any potential accusations by saying, I've done my research. I know others who have done their research. So please, if you want to come at me, you need to do your research as well. The source list in my case study has some good reading material, but to research this incident specifically, I want to direct you to a list of resources that Lacey from Double Hockey Sticks put together. I'm also including a link to this in today's show notes. Okay, let me take you back to May 2022, when TSN's Rick Westhead broke a story that would become one of the biggest scandals in the history of Canadian sport. Westhead reported that Hockey Canada, the national governing body that organizes all of Canada's international hockey programs, and a recipient of both federal government funding and major corporate sponsorships, had quietly settled a civil lawsuit filed by a young woman who alleged that in 2018, June specifically, she was sexually assaulted by a group of players from that year's World Junior Championship team. The settlement had been kept entirely out of the public eye, so there wasn't any announcement and there was no accountability, no names were shared. And then that story that was brought to light in 2022 set off a chain of events that would end up shaking Canadian hockey to its very foundations. Now, as more and more details emerged, what became clear was that this wasn't just about a single settlement back in 2018. You see, Hockey Canada had been operating what's been widely called a slush fund, officially known as the National Equity Fund, which was a pool of money drawn largely from player registration fees. These were the fees that hockey families across Canada pay every year to register their kids in the sport of hockey. That fund had been used to quietly pay out at least $7.6 million across 9 settlements related to sexual assault and sexual abuse claims going back to 1989. The 2018 settlement wasn't an exception. This was a pattern of behavior, once again, dating back to 1989 at least. When Hockey Canada executives were brought before Canada's Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage to answer for this, the CEO at the time acknowledged that the organization had been dealing with an average of 1 to 2 sexual assault allegations per year for at least 6 years. Multiple members of parliament said they were shocked to hear it said out loud. Corporate sponsors like Tim Hortons, Scotiabank, Canadian Tire, Esso, TELUS began pulling their funding. The federal government froze Hockey Canada's funding entirely. Provincial hockey branches started withholding their registration fee contributions, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said publicly that both Canadians and the government had lost their confidence in Hockey Canada's leadership. And yet, for months, Hockey Canada's leadership dug in. The board chair resigned in August 2022, framing it as an act of proactive accountability, but at the very next parliamentary hearing, the interim chair defended the organization's handling of the 2018 case, attacked their critics as spreading misinformation, and insisted the CEO retained the board's full confidence. It wasn't until an independent governance review was released in November 2022 and the entire board and CEO resigned in the same week that the organization finally stopped protecting itself and started replacing its leadership. Okay, so here's what I want you to kind of hold in your mind from all of that. Every step of the way, Hockey Canada moved only when it had no other choice. Every commitment to change was extracted under pressure from the public, not offered willingly by Hockey Canada. There were governance reforms, sure. There were leadership transitions, sure. There were promises that there would be a new culture, but none of that actually came from the inside or happened proactively. It was all forced on them from outside pressure, like the government and the Canadian public. Okay, so here's the thing that makes the story more complicated. While all of this institutional reckoning was taking place, a separate process was actually playing itself out in the criminal justice system. So London, Ontario police had initially investigated the 2018 incident, and they closed the case in 2019 without filing any charges. It wasn't until the public pressure from 2022 forced a reopening of the case that things moved forward. In February 2024, 5 former players from that 2018 World Junior team were charged with sexual assault. Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Dylan Dubé, Alex Formenton, and Cal Foote. The trial itself was complicated before it even began. The first attempt ended in a mistrial in April 2025, after the jury was dismissed due to concerns about conduct during proceedings. The case was retried before Superior Court Justice Maria Carroccia, sitting alone without a jury. The complainant, referred to throughout the proceedings only as EM, spent 9 days on the stand, 7 of them under cross-examination. On July 24th, 2025, Justice Carroccia acquitted all 5 defendants, finding that the prosecution could not meet its own burden of proof. Carter Hart was the only one of the 5 defendants to take the stand in his defense. What came out of that trial record, between his testimony, the testimony of other witnesses, and the text messages entered into evidence, paints a picture that makes it clear Carter Hart and the other 4 former Hockey Canada players were anything but innocent. Hart admitted on the stand to engaging in sexual acts with EM that night. His defense was that she was a willing participant, that she, in his words, in a text message to teammates after Hockey Canada opened its investigation, was, quote, begging for guys to bang her, end quote. That text was entered into evidence. So was a group chat in which the players, upon learning that they were being investigated, exchanged messages insisting that they had done nothing wrong and had obtained consent for everything that happened. The other 4 defendants did not testify. What we also know from trial proceedings is that Brett Howden, a witness for the Crown, not one of the accused, testified that in a prior statement to Hockey Canada investigators, he had described hearing EM crying as he was leaving the room. "I just heard her kind of weeping," he told investigators at the time. "I didn't know what was going on, so I just went to my room because I didn't want to be a part of anything." That prior statement was admitted as evidence. There was also a text Howden sent to a teammate the morning after, describing what Dylan Dubé was doing to EM as Howden was leaving the room. That text was ruled inadmissible by Justice Carroccia, but it was widely reported on. It is publicly available, and I think it's important that people know it exists. When Howden appeared as a witness at trial, he testified that he no longer had any memory of the events of that night. So let me be direct about what we're working with here. A woman testified for 9 days, 7 of them under cross-examination, that she was intoxicated, frightened, and she felt she had no safe way out of that room. A witness who was there placed himself leaving while she was crying. And the only defendant who spoke corroborated the essential facts of that night while insisting in a text message that she wanted everything that happened. The acquittal means the legal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt was not met. It does not mean these men are innocent in any moral or ethical sense of the word. those are not the same thing, and it's crucial that we not pretend that they are. There is a difference between what a court can prove and what an institution and the broader public are obligated to reckon with. Which brings me to Carter Hart and the Vegas Golden Knights. So 3 months after the acquittals in October 2025, the Golden Knights signed Hart to a 2-year, $4 million contract. He was the first of the 5 acquitted players to land an NHL deal. And as Vegas has made their run through the playoffs this year, all the way to the Stanley Cup Final, Hart has been their starting goaltender. He's been the face of one of the most exciting stories in the league this postseason. Now, I want to be clear, the NHL and the NHLPA conducted their own processes and determined a reinstatement timeline. The Golden Knights were well within their rights by the rules of the league to sign him. That is all true. But within their rights and the right thing to do are also not the same thing. The Golden Knights' statement when they signed Hart said the organization, quote, remains committed to the core values that have defined our organization from its inception, end quote. I don't know what those values are exactly, because what I see is an organization that, the moment the league said it was permissible, signed a player whose name is attached to one of the most disturbing cases in the recent history of the sport, without any visible public engagement with what that decision means, without any acknowledgement of EM, and without any apparent consideration of what message it sends to the survivors watching, or anyone, any children, who might see Carter Hart as a potential role model. You see, that's the institutional failure I want to talk about. This isn't just about the Golden Knights, but about the NHL and hockey culture at large, as a whole. Okay, so here's the timeline. Hockey Canada got caught maintaining a secret fund to quietly settle sexual assault allegations for over 3 decades. Under enormous public and political pressure, it went through a leadership overhaul, commissioned independent reviews, made governance reforms, and eventually had its federal funding restored. Now, on the surface, that looks like accountability, but the reforms were all procedural. What changed was the structure, not the culture, and it's the culture that produced the crisis in the first place. So we've seen this before in hockey. The Chicago Blackhawks, when the Kyle Beach case became public in 2021, commissioned an independent investigation, issued public apologies, and accepted resignations from senior hockey operations staff, including their general manager. Now, that looked like a more accountable response than anything Hockey Canada managed. But the head coach, whose knowledge of Beach's original 2010 complaint was central to that investigation, was later hired by another NHL team. The general manager who resigned eventually became the general manager of another NHL team. The franchise paid a fine to the league worth a mere fraction of a % of its value. Sure, accountability was performed. The institutional consequences, however, were barely a blip on the radar. See, here's the cycle. Crisis happens. The institution responds, usually only when it's forced to. Then they manage the optics, and then the sport moves on. Carter Hart being in the Stanley Cup Final right now is the sport moving on. I think it's worth asking out loud, as hockey fans, as people who care about this sport, whether we're okay with that, with the sport moving on, and what it says about us if we are okay with the sport moving on. Now, I'm not saying that Carter Hart should be banned from hockey forever. I'm not saying the legal outcome should have been different. What I am saying is that the NHL as an institution had a choice. The Golden Knights as a franchise had a choice. And the choice they made to sign him with no public engagement, no visible accountability framework, nothing. That tells you something about what the sport values and who it protects. I'll say it again. EM spent 9 days on the stand, 7 of them in cross-examination. She came forward in a case that was only reopened because of public and political pressure in a sport whose governing body's first instinct was to pay for her silence and the silence of others like her. And then, when the trial ended, the league's process moved forward. Carter Hart signed a contract, and now he's a playoff redemption story. And before you say that he's learned his lesson, I think we should all ask, has he? This was him just a couple days ago during a press conference when asked by a reporter how he's learned and grown in the months since the trial.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot. So I've grown a lot since then, and I've been able to meet a lot of good people in the community. And I think the Vegas Golden Knights Foundation has done a really good job of making it easy for me to integrate into the community and meet a lot of cool people. And just really fortunate to be here in Vegas. And it's a great culture of people. And like I said, I've met a lot of cool people, and just very fortunate to be here in Las Vegas and with this group.
Immediately after that response, a member of the Golden Knights communication team ended Hart's availability before any follow-up questions could be asked. The press was promised a 15-minute block with him. They got less than half of that allotted time. You can come to your own conclusions, but does that sound like someone who has learned and grown? An organization that would essentially turn him into the face of their franchise, do you think they've learned and grown? An institution that would market his return to the league as a player who has risen above challenging times and adverse circumstances. Do you think they've learned and grown? Hockey culture doesn't change because institutions say it has, or even will. It changes when we, as fans, as media, as players, as coaches, as people who love this sport, refuse to let it move on as though nothing happened. Carter Hart is in the Stanley Cup Final. His name could end up being etched into the Stanley Cup forever. The Vegas Golden Knights will likely never reckon with that. Neither will the NHL. But we have to. So how do we, as fans of this game, address a sport whose culture handles abuse in this way? After the break, Pam Yau will take over as host, and you'll hear my hockey fan story. We'll be right back.
Hungry for spicy food and even hotter conversations? Craving community and authentic storytelling? Then join the table. This is Minor Legends, a new comedy fiction podcast supported by Potluck. Pull up every week with me, Angela Wong Carbone, and follow the stories of me and my friends as we serve up tasty tales of what it means to be Asian American at our weekly dinner hang. If you enjoy deep dishing on absurd stereotypes like tiger moms who tutor your dating game rather than grades, the insanity of your parents' immigration story, to the legend of that one good Asian cousin you can never live up to, then pull up a seat and grab a plate. Featuring dinner guests like Ronnie Chang, Brian Park, Usama Siddiqui, Celia Au, Perry Young, Supriya Ganesh, and more. It's a tasty rotation that'll leave you belly laughing and steeped in relatable and spicy conversations. Can you take the heat? Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts.
So just a quick introduction of myself again. Hello, I am Pamela Yau, and I am a native Philadelphian and a diehard Flyers fan. And, you can learn a little bit more about me in episode 10 of this season to hear about my story of my hockey fandom. And so recently, Nate spoke with guest hosts 365 Hockey Girl about his involvement in the sport of hockey and what prompted him to start this podcast. And you can hear that story in episode 12 of this season. So for now, let's find a little bit more about his life as a hockey fan. And so thanks for switching your seats with me today, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to take me and also our audience back all the way back to the beginning and tell us about how did you become this diehard hockey fan? What's your origin story?
So, as I mentioned in my conversation with Ava, it actually started when the Mighty Ducks came out back in, I think it was '92, and I saw that movie. I must have seen it twice in theaters, and later that year, I went to my very first NHL game, which was at the old Brendan Burns Arena where the Devils used to play. And it was like right in the shadow of Giants Stadium, what's now MetLife Stadium. And they were playing the Montreal Canadiens, and I didn't know who to cheer for. I didn't realize all of those logos there, that's like the home team you're supposed to cheer for. Because this was, I think I was like 8 years old. So I didn't know what I was doing. I just recognized the Habs logo from a scene in The Mighty Ducks. There, one of the characters, Guy, is wearing a Habs jersey. Wow. I think he wore a Habs jersey maybe in 2 scenes in the movie. And I recognized that logo, and I thought, well, I'll cheer for that team because I knew that logo. And then they won the game. And of course, it was the 92-93 season. Good. And they won the cup in 93. So that's kind of where my hockey fandom started. So that I became a fan of the Habs then. Granted, it was like pre-internet, so it was much more difficult for me to like follow that team. If I was at like the top of a hill with, long wave FM radio, I could just like late at night, maybe make out, set the dial and just get a game. But it was very, very rarely that I would be able to catch anything about the Habs. And then, of course, that string of years, all the teams that I was surrounded by won the cup. Like we were talking about, we had 93 was the Habs, then 94 it was the Rangers, then 95 it was the Devils. So I kind of just thought that was like how hockey worked. Like the teams all around me there would be a parade somewhere nearby. There would be, fans going crazy all over the place. But of course, the following year, not the case. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started for me. And I think like as far as the game itself, I was just mesmerized at how fast everybody was moving. It was just such a cool thing to see. Like skating was so novel. Like you skate to play a sport that blew my mind. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to hockey.
And so were your family like hockey fans as well, or?
Not at all. In fact, my family, my dad was a sports guy, but baseball was really like his sport. And over the years, like he eventually started paying attention a little bit to basketball. But that was partially because I played a lot of basketball growing up. That ended up being the sport that I focused the most on. Like I was saying in my conversation with Ava, hockey was a struggle when I picked it up because I couldn't make friends and I didn't really like anybody on my hockey team. And all my friends in school were playing basketball. So I decided that was going to be the sport that I played. And so because that was my sport all the way through like middle school, high school, and college, that was the sport that my dad ended up kind of following a little bit. But baseball was his first love. We were always a baseball family. So hockey was sort of an anomaly, and kind of came out of nowhere. And I was the only one in the family that really like cared about hockey. But my dad loves sports. So anytime I turn on a hockey game, he'll sit down and watch with me. And like, I was just over at my parents' house, the day that the U.S. women's won the gold medal. So I turned on the TV. My mom was like flipping out, why are you turning on the TV to sports? And my dad literally like sat down. And he's just like, I'm going to watch this. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And well, I would have to ask, your dad, has he become a fan of
So what he likes to do is he likes to keep track of just whatever team is sort of in the zeitgeist. And since we're a New York City family, he keeps tabs on the Rangers and the Devils. Not so much the Islanders because they're a little too far away since they're out in like Nassau County. But he does keep track of like how the different hockey teams are doing. And if I happen to be over and I want to throw on a game, I'll put something up and he'll watch it, and he'll even like occasionally banter with me a little bit and just talk about what he knows, which is very little, but it's like headlines about, especially if something big has happened in the hockey world, he'll chat with me about it. So yeah, that's kind of how our relationship with hockey is. And of course now with a Japanese Canadian being the captain of the Montreal Canadiens, it's sort of fun because my dad being Japanese, he's like, oh, that's interesting. So
and going to the fact that you're growing up in Jersey and you became a Habs fan, obviously Montreal. Mm-hmm. So tell me more about that story, and maybe when you saw the Habs when they came over into your home turf, but in how you made that journey, and when was maybe the first time you saw them at the...
So I actually ended up kind of falling away. Like I said, I fell away from hockey and didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the sport until many years later when I think I was in my mid to late 20s, and I started dating this girl who was like a diehard Devils fan, and she had season tickets. And so, of course we were going to hockey games, and I kind of tagged along and became a Devils fan, and we were always at the rink, and she liked to go ice skating. So that's just what we did. Hockey became like that, a center point in our relationship. And then we broke up, and I wanted to keep watching hockey. I just wanted to stay involved with the sport. And I was enjoying like picking up ice skating again. Although I had been skating like throughout, even after I stopped playing, I still kept on skating, but like it became much more of a regular thing. And so I wanted to get more involved in hockey as a sport, but I couldn't stay a Devils fan because I'm like, that was her thing. And, being around Devils stuff just always left that like sore spot with me. So I was like, I'll just go back to the team that I chose when I was little. And that's how I fully became a Habs fan. And then during like my leading up to my 30th birthday, I wanted to make that like my hockey immersion year. So I took a road trip up to visit some family in the Toronto area, and then road tripped it over to Montreal. A couple of my friends and I got a few tickets. We got a ticket to the Habs versus the Jets. Jets came into Montreal. And then that Saturday, Saturday night hockey in Montreal, it was against the Bruins. And that was the first time I had been at the Bell Center for a rivalry game. And that was the first week that I had ever been to the Bell Center. I got to go twice that week. And oh my God, what an atmosphere. Like I was absolutely blown away. And like going to the Devils games a whole bunch. Yeah, it was fun. And it's the Prudential Center does have a great atmosphere and a great crowd, but like the Bell Center is at a whole other level.
And I totally agree, because I remember going, when I went to visit Montreal, going to visit with a friend at the Bell Center, and the only thing I could describe it or similar to is when I went to an Eagles football home game, and that sort of feeling, vibe of this entire spirit. And that it just is, you have to be there. So it's really wonderful to know that you were able to experience that.
Yeah. And then luckily enough, a few years later, I would meet my now wife, and the way we met, we actually met because we had mutual friends on Facebook. And in my Facebook profile picture, I was wearing actually this hoodie right here, this Habs hoodie.
So fun.
Yeah. And she like I was commenting on one of our mutual friends' posts. We ended up chatting, and she was like, she clicked on my profile, saw that I lived in New Jersey, and she's like, how does somebody from the New York City area become a Habs fan? And that's how we started. That's how we started talking. And she lived in Montreal, and eventually, as we were dating, it was just been back and forth. And the company that she used to work for had a few seats at the Bell Center in the club and a few seats in the lounge. And so she would every so often score some tickets, and if it just so happened to be on a weekend that I was up there, we would go catch the Habs for free at the Bell Center, which was always a blast to be able to go to a Bell Center game for free. So I consider myself very, very lucky to have had that opportunity.
And it all worked out.
It really did. It totally did. And now, interestingly enough, we were able to get vanity license plates. So if you see New Jersey license plates that say "Go Habs," that's us.
So if you see Nate rolling around, this is it's him if you see that license plate.
Exactly.
I mean, that is such a wonderful, fantastic, serendipitous way of meeting. And I would say also, with your experiences, obviously being able to meet your wonderful wife because of, your love of the Habs.
Exactly.
But yes. And what I'm interested also, and I'm sure the audience wants to know, what do you love most in regards to the Habs and also, in recent years, things have been up, things have been down. And so what do you take away from, what your fandom of this team?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've always loved about sports, and I think because the very first sports team that I ever connected to was the Yankees. And the Yankees are synonymous with baseball. And of course, that for me, I recognize they are the evil empire. And I also recognize if I wasn't born and raised here, I likely would not be a Yankees fan. But that's my team. And one of the things about the Yankees that I've always loved is just the rich, deep history that the team has. So that's something that I ended up getting really drawn to. I didn't discover it until much later, because when I chose the Habs as my team all those years ago, I didn't know any difference. I was just, that's the logo I recognize. But then when I came back to the team as an adult, discovering the very rich history of massive names that have been a part of this organization, you've got, of course, Maurice Richard, Pocket Rocket. You've got, the Flower, Lafleur himself. And then, of course, going into more recent history, players like Shea Weber and, of course, the legend Carey Price, who I still maintain to this day, he is one of the best goalies to never win a cup. He just never had the team in front of him that could support him in his work. He was just, and that was always something I loved watching was Carey Price in net. It just, it always sends chills down my spine when I think about that. But also, it's kind of sad, very sad that he never got the chance to win a cup. But he does have gold medals to his name, so at least he has that cred. And
in this this past couple minutes, you talked about the legendary history of Montreal and the playoff runs and the Stanley Cup wins and the near wins. So was there any particular one that really stood out to you that you're that was a moment where you're I am that you realize this is what it's all about in being a Habs fan?
So interestingly enough, I have very, very, very vague memories of that first Stanley Cup win. And really, I only experienced it through television and then like a newspaper. That was kind of it. Of course, being in the New York City area, you know, they don't really care about Montreal. So it was just the Stanley Cup was on TV, and then, you know, watched that. But so that really didn't stick out in my mind as like a something that's really solidified me as a fan. Interestingly enough, it isn't even a game or an on ice moment. It was connecting with a group of Habs fans here in this area. There's a group called the NYC Habs, and it's just a fan group that I connected with and became friends with a bunch of them. And actually, they've been some of my longest standing friends the last like 15 years or so. And we'll get together for watch parties. I helped to organize some of the watch parties over a span of a couple of years. And it's just a great group of people. And one year, it was during the I want to say it was the 2017 playoff run, or it was 2016. I don't remember, any time in that time period. And they just had, it was, I think, the second round against the Rangers, and it was just a madhouse. Like we get to this bar that we normally are hanging out at, and there's 300 Habs fans packed into this bar in Lower Manhattan, and John Bartlett, the voice of the Habs on Sportsnet in Montreal, he came and because he only does a regular season, he doesn't cover the playoffs. So he came and did like the bar announcements in New York City for us. And the official Habs YouTube channel came and recorded us marching through Manhattan from a little deli that we used to hang out at, from that place, doing some pre-gaming, and then marching through the streets of Manhattan with all of our Habs gear, flags, jerseys. There was like 20 or 30 of us that all then went to this bar where we met up with the other 200 some odd fans and just packed into this bar to watch. And that was the moment, I think, where I was like, yeah, this is the fan group that I'm a part of. And this is the team that I'm through thick and thin, right? Like those years were not good years, even though like it was kind of like the Detroit Red Wings, where like they'd make it into the playoffs, but they wouldn't really do much once they were in, you know? So there was a lot of that kind of going on. And then it was sort of downhill after that through the remainder of the Marc Bergevin years. They were just not good years. But we always had each other as like a group of fans, which I loved. Yeah.
And I just want to know, what bar is this? Is it a Habs bar, or is
it's not a Habs bar. It's just the bar was called Finnerty's, and they just happened to like, I think one of the previous organizers of the group was friends with the owner of the bar, and they just maintained a steady friendship, and he maintained a steady friendship with our crew over the years, and just always had his doors open to us, and we were just a big group of paying customers, so he would just keep the place open for us. So
and just hearing you talk about like being able to like meet up with this this group of fellow fans, and now they've, you know, you're saying the longest friendships that in your, you know, as an adult, and I'm just wondering, like, in these years, like, and how things have, you know, kind of transpired, like where do you see yourself in relation to like how you're, you know, building up this community and this podcast and including your fandom in it?
Yeah, I think so there's I guess a little bit of a separation in that, you know, with this podcast, I like to be as like team neutral or team ambivalent as possible. And there's not like a ton of intersection with my friends who are Habs fans, at least here in the New York City area. I do have one fellow Asian Habs fan who lives here in this area. But I don't even know if he realizes I've got this podcast. I'll have to tell him.
Absolutely. Send him a
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely. I should. But I think for me, it's always been about like building community around hockey. Like, there are a lot of things wrong with this sports culture. But one of the things that I've always found so helpful for me is that I can still at least find pockets of people that are in my corner and kind of like-minded, and we can share beers over hockey and enjoy watching this sport unfold together. And that, I think, has been sort of where I find my grounding. And yeah, like this podcast, it has sort of the positives and negatives. Like we're addressing everything with the show. But at the same time, I think where I connect it all is through that building of community with through the podcast, just Asian hockey fans, and through my Habs fan group, friends of the same who are fans of the same team. So,
And I would say that you've definitely helped build this community in relation to bring together us like Asian American hockey fans. And I think about what is this larger community in regards to hockey and Asian Canadian, Asian American players. And so earlier you mentioned Nick Suzuki, who's currently the captain of the Montreal Canadiens.
Mm-hmm.
But as you were growing up and through the years, was there a particular player of Asian descent that really made an impression on you and that you really related to?
So I think everything for me, I have to always look back on, because as a kid, there's like the years that I sort of kind of paid attention to hockey, and there weren't really a lot of Asian players that stood out in my mind, but there were players that I would later on realize, oh my God, they were Asian. Like Paul Kariya, for example. I knew about Paul Kariya, but like the fact that that's a Japanese name, it didn't dawn on me until years later after he'd already retired. And I'm like, holy shit, that guy's Japanese. Like that, I didn't realize that. So I then have to like look back on those years. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, is also to like educate myself on this rich history of Asian players. So, but now I think, and then in the years of being a hockey fan as an adult, now, paying more attention, even before I sort of had this kind of racial awakening, I think there was still a part of me that was kind of drawn to those players that I could kind of see myself in, guys like Matt Dumba, for instance, who's half Filipino. And I think that has kind of really drawn me back to those players. But now we're seeing an influx, right? Like you've got Jordan Spence, you've got Jason Robertson, who's just absolutely blowing it up right now. And then of course, Nick Suzuki, like the captain of my favorite hockey team, and the unofficial captain of this here podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, I think those are the players. And then like looking back as I work on this podcast, the ability to look back on those players that were active when I was younger and when I was first getting into hockey, and having some of those memories, those early memories of watching the sport, and then imprinting some of that, of knowing that there were Asian guys playing. But I think the first time that it became super visible to me was when I started getting into women's hockey. And I know you had mentioned in your episode that Julie Chu was a name that stood out to you. And that instantly, I think, so when I started getting into women's hockey, leading up to the Sochi Olympics, because I made a decision, I'm like, I want to pay attention to these women. They're the announcement for Team USA came out, and here they are, they're going to the Olympics, and then I saw that the captain was an Asian American, and I'm like, that's pretty damn cool. Let me look into this. And then I ended up just really paying attention to her and the team, and that's kind of what sucked me into into women's hockey. So Julie Chu, I think, is the first Asian player that I paid attention to because she was Asian and followed her in real time as an Asian player. So yeah.
And of course, if Julie, you're listening,
Exactly.
Yes, you need to talk of names if you're available. And I think that, that's something that we both talked about, connected, and being able to see someone like Julie play at such a high level. Of course, I would say also knowing her academic prowess as well. And I think that, really to hear your story, I can even, in regards to, how I came to hockey and being able to see that representation, that it makes difference. And Paul Kariya, he was in the Mighty Ducks as well.
Yes, he was. He was in, I believe it was the second movie in D2 is when he made his appearance. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure he was in the second Mighty Ducks movie.
So so he snuck in there a bit. So a little subconscious.
Yeah, and of course he played for the team.
Exactly. And I would say that it's to know that Asian players, that there is an Asian player that is the captain of your favorite team, like how that is just, to think that is the case. It's just, so inspiring. And, I can only imagine it just makes, being a fan like ever a little bit, sweeter, even in times of frustration.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And now looking at the team, they are in the midst of a rebuild, and it's looking really good. Like they're currently the best team in Canada. They are, I think, maybe still in second place in the Atlantic. I'd have to double check the standings. They've been up and down between first and second in the Atlantic division, which has been encouraging to see. And Nick Suzuki's just been lighting it up, point per game at least. Just such a great player to watch. He's just got an incredible game. The way he sees the game just always blows my mind. So I'm excited about the way the team is going, but I'm also excited about that representation. I was up in a hockey shop up in Montreal called Sports Experts, and just walking around the shop one day, and I saw a little Asian boy getting fitted for, I guess, his first set of gear, trying on his skates and putting on, his shoulder pads and shin guards and everything. And I'm like, that feels like the Suzuki effect. That feels like the reason that kid is doing that is because he sees himself, represented on the biggest stage for the biggest franchise. So it's really cool to see.
And, knowing that and, seeing that we have very young, like Asian Canadian, Asian American players, like going into the game, like in your position, in relation to being a host of this podcast and being a hockey fan, like what are your hopes and dreams for the future of, hockey at all levels?
Yeah. I mean, for starters, I think seeing the game explode the way it has on the women's side of things, that's something that I'm so happy about. And I've mentioned on the show before, I've got my own misgivings about the organization, but I think it's still fantastic to see women out there playing, and I think that has sort of opened the door for me to even talk about Asian women, right? Like we've got, of course, Julie Chu, who, had her career, she's since retired, but she's still coaching. She's the head coach at Concordia right now, and still very involved in the sport, obviously. Her wife is, I think, one of the assistant coaches for the Montreal Victoire. So, seeing that hockey connection still in place. And then there are Asian players even PWHL currently. They aren't quite as numerous as they are in the NHL, but of course that'll come with time. You know, you've got players like Nicole Gosling, who plays for Montreal, and she's a rising star that I'm very interested in seeing her career move forward. Kimberly Newell, who's a goalie out in Vancouver. I think Anna Segedi also plays out in Vancouver. So, you know, these are names and players that these little girls will look up to, and that's what I'm excited about. So I'm, as far as like working on this podcast, I think bringing all of these stories together, having a place for them to be consolidated and to shine a spotlight on them, that I think is what I'm most excited about. And as a fan, I just enjoy being able to tell these stories, you know? And I think for me, what's interesting as well is like, not that my enjoyment of being loyal to the Habs has diminished, but I think my appreciation for teams all over the place, for hockey teams around the continent, no matter who they are, like getting to know fans of different teams, has really kind of opened up my own enjoyment of hockey overall, right? Chatting with you, a Flyers fan, I never imagined I would develop a soft spot for the Flyers, and now I'm like, here we are. And then
yes, I was going to say earlier, it must be nice to have seen all those different runs and, you know, the wins and of course, like I talk about this when you interviewed me, but of course, I mean, you know, a little facetious at the moment, but
yeah.
It definitely, and you know, as you know, someone that, you know, we were able to talk about my story. I want to know, what's the story that you want to be able to tell? Like, is there something that you want to, you know, go, oh, is there someone that you want to interview? And as well as, is there a longer story that you hope to be able to tell through your podcast or through other formats and platforms?
I think ultimately, to answer the second question first, I think the longer story I want to tell is that of our cultures, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and our relationship to this sport that I love so much, and that I know many people love, and to really highlight who we are, the fact that we have existed in this sport for such a long time. You know, and that it's unfortunate that our stories haven't been told and that we haven't seen ourselves represented in this game the way we would really like to. And there are so many different reasons for that. And most of them are, unfortunately, negative reasons. But I think part of doing what I do is to really like highlight our resilience as East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian diaspora, as mixed race people who haven't had a fair shot in this very white-centric sport. I think I also want to highlight the fact that, you know, this sport, even though it's very white-centric currently, its roots are Black and Indigenous, and that's how the sport has its foundation. So being able to highlight that as well, I know that's not really my place as, you know, somebody who's not Black, but I also do think there's a worthwhile conversation to be had about racial solidarity as we, you know, combat white supremacist mentalities that have sort of pervaded this environment for far too long. So I think that's kind of what I'm aiming for with this podcast. When I first started it, I was just like, no, I just want to tell our stories. But as I think I've dived deeper and deeper into the history of hockey, I realized there's really no way around addressing these sort of darker truths, but I want to do so in as positive a light as possible. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. And as far as somebody that I would love to interview, I do have some contacts going on with a few people out there. And I don't want to put them on blast right now because still sort of working that a little bit. But there are people that I haven't yet reached out to and haven't had any contact with, and frankly don't know where I would even start. So I'll put them on blast. Julie Chu, if you are listening, I would love to chat with you. I would love to hear your story and even just maybe fanboy a little bit. The fact that there is also that Montreal connection. You did play for the Montreal Canadiens for a little while, in the former Montreal Stars. So like how I'm talking to her in the second person as if she's actually listening to this. But yeah.
And so from your, having, heard these different and interviews like people like myself about, being hockey fans, what do you think that the National Hockey League or even the BWHL, like what can they do to, help bring in more Asian American, Asian Canadian hockey fans, like from your perspective?
Well, that's a very loaded question. And I think part of it will have to start with culture. I recently put out an episode that kind of discusses the problematic nature of hockey culture. And there's a book that I recently finished reading called Game Misconduct that delves deep into a number of the problematic aspects of hockey culture. And the main one, the big one that they really tackle in there is racism. And I think hockey overall, the various governing bodies throughout the hockey world, including the NHL, including Hockey Canada, the major juniors in Canada, USA Hockey, all of the various affiliates throughout the hockey world, they all have to come to terms with their own racism. And I don't really see that changing from a top-down level, but that's what would need to happen. I think, as we do more of this kind of work, as we have more of these kinds of conversations, and as we see, there are organizations that I see popping up everywhere, grassroots organizations that are doing some incredible work to bring minority populations into the game. So, here in New Jersey, we've got Hockey in New Jersey that I've coached for several years, and I'm still kind of connected to that organization. I haven't coached with them for a little while, but that's one group that provides hockey to a number of underrepresented demographics. So that's one group. There are groups up in Winnipeg. I think it's called First Shift, they're something like that. I don't remember the name exactly, but there are other organizations all throughout North America that are doing this kind of work. And I think that will help. I think as well, profiling players like Jason Robertson, bringing him to the forefront of your conversation, I think that would go a long way. Unfortunately, a lot of the marketing personnel seem to be more interested in pushing the Tkachuk brothers in our faces rather than the Robertson brothers, who in my estimation are better representations of America than the Tkachuks. But I'm not in charge of NHL marketing. I'm not in charge of USA Hockey marketing, so that's not my decision. But yeah, I think that ultimately would be those are a few of the things that I would think need to change in order to see more and more Asians. But at the same time, there is a little bit of that momentum anyway, because there are people who just decide, I want to show up. There's people throughout history like Jim Pack, like Robin Bawa, like Paul Correa, who just decided, I'm going to do this. And then, so those are the players that are doing that now. And I think just by sheer number, and by momentum, it'll happen. You'll start to see the percentages be more representative of society at large. But I think it'll be much slower if the organizations that kind of govern hockey don't kind of get their shit together.
And what you just said there's so many different layers to this. And hear that you were involved in coaching youth in hockey, and to see that there's organizations that you mentioned there in New Jersey, here in Philadelphia, there's Snyder Hockey, trying to get children on the ice, which is, to think of fundamentally that can be very expensive and inaccessible. So to have access even to the facilities, and then to have access in your, what you were able to do in coaching youth players, and, to think about all the different layers. So like, what are your hopes and dreams, like in talking about the near future, the medium, the long term, for what you hope in relation to, Asians in hockey, the name of this podcast, and also for the podcast.
Yeah. So I think in the near future, I hope to see the Robertson brothers get more airtime, more profile as like faces of the NHL. And there are players that are coming up. As those players come up and reach more notoriety, I think of Hao Shi-Wang, who is, I think, the highest drafted Chinese-born player, and so that's a player that I want to see more highly profiled. Kevin He is another one who is coming up through the system, who I want to see more highly profiled. So, that's kind of my hope for the near future, that those players will not only get their time to shine on the ice, but like that these marketing groups will, especially at the NHL level, will start to recognize, they'll just put them out there for an affinity night. These are the faces of the league. And if you make them, like, put them on your posters, put them in your commercials, in your ads, everywhere, so that kids all over the place can start seeing themselves more and more regularly, and it sort of just happened by accident in Montreal, because he's the captain. So of course he's going to be sort of the face of the franchise. Nick Suzuki is just out there all over the place in Montreal, but I think by accident that sort of helps. So I think in the short term, that's my hope. And then looking out a little bit further, I hope that some of these, like I was saying before, I hope that some of these systems begin to change, and that people in decision-making positions, that they start to put people who look like us in these decision-making positions, so that, scouting doesn't keep overlooking players of color, so that, at the coaching level, at the executive level, all of it has to change. So I think, looking out further, that's sort of my my hope.
And I just think that, this is where it starts, like to have these conversations that you've had with, different individuals that are in various influencers in relation to hockey, and even yourself in being a host of this podcast. So I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and for inviting us into this world and be able to have these, really like meaningful conversations, which like we might have been, having in our own heads, and now we actually have an opportunity to put this out there and be able to actually, tell the story that Asians have been in hockey for, since almost since its inception.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for being a part of this journey, and for coming and asking me questions. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nate, for sitting down for this interview.
Absolutely. That's it for today's episode. Tune in next time when I'll be chatting with Bulbul Kartenbay, a former professional hockey player with the Metropolitan Riveters and founder of the KB Sports Agency. Bulbul was the first Kazakh player to play professionally in North America, and I'm so excited for you to hear her share her story. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for listening. Asians in Hockey is a part of the Potluck Podcast Collective and is hosted and produced by me, Nate Nakau. Contributing producers are Chad Soon and Chris Wu. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and share this podcast with your friends. To keep up with us on socials, follow us on Instagram and Threads at Asians in Hockey and on Blue Sky at asiansinhockey.com. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/asiansinhockey. And please feel free to shoot me an email at contact@asiansinhockey.com, and don't forget to visit asiansinhockey.com for more great content. See you next time on the Asians in Hockey podcast.